Well, the one part of it.
But we
anyway.
can talk about food at least.
Yeah.
It's the feeding of the 5,000 men.
Yes.
So yeah, I joke with
This, I didn't realize it was that right after John the Baptist was murdered.
yeah. So it's an interesting. If you read the first 12 verses of Matthew 14, it's the party that Herod threw, and then you go
Remember
from
when we carried that
into
head on a
compassion.
pole with the hat?
Yeah.
Yeah, we got teased a lot about that in Detroit.
I bet. In Detroit.
That was the other argument. Is the other thing I commented on yesterday is, it is biblical to ask for somebody's head on a platter. Probably not Christian, but it's in the Bible.
Just because it's in the Bible doesn't mean that it's right or wrong.
Yeah.
It's just
The devil
a
quotes
fact.
the Bible.
It's a fact, Jack. It's a fact, Jack.
Are you going to do that again at the next rally?
No, we got Olaf now.
Yeah,
Yes.
Right.
Well, do you want to start us?
sure. Well, thank you for joining us. We are in Matthew chapter 14 today, verses 13 through 21. We are preparing for the 10th Sunday after Pentecost, August 6th. So let us pray. Glorious God, your generosity waters the world with goodness, and you cover your creation with abundance. Awaken in us a hunger for food that satisfies both body and spirit, and with this food fill all the starving world. Through your Son, Jesus Christ, our Savior and Lord. Amen. From Matthew 14. After John the Baptist is murdered, Jesus desires a time of solitude. Still, his compassion for others will not allow him to dismiss those who need him, and he is moved to perform one of his greatest miracles. Now when Jesus heard about the beheading of John the Baptist, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them and cured their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away so they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves. And Jesus said to them, They need not go away. You give them something to eat. And they replied, We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish. And he said, Bring them here to me. Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples. And he gave them to the crowd, and they gave them to the crowds. And all ate and were filled. And they took up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. The gospel of our Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ. Well, Matthew 14 begins with the story of the gruesome death of John the Baptist, a cousin of Jesus. The head of John is presented on a platter at Herod's birthday party. When Jesus hears this news, he withdraws in a boat to a deserted place. What impact might the news of the death of his cousin have on Jesus?
Well, he lost someone, a family member. And,
In a pretty horrific way.
yeah. And says a lot about Herod.
Yeah.
And had to be.
Well, he was tricked into this from.
He also had John in prison, too.
He was afraid of John,
Yeah.
but not to the point where he was going to
Yeah,
take
kill
his
him.
head, I don't think.
Yeah.
And it was his own hubris that led him to that point, when he made his big boast to his stepdaughter, and then he couldn't lose face. He had to go through with it.
I think it's, the other news is, it's the end of the beginning part of this ministry cycle. John the Baptist announcing, and now it's, sort of like when you have to fully take over something, it's changes your responsibility levels.
You go from in training to actually doing it.
Yeah, and Jesus had John to prepare the way, and then all of a sudden he's been taken. So a lot of food for thought there.
A lot to take in.
And how much compassion did Herod extend to John the Baptist?
How long did he have him in prison? Do you ever know?
Oh, well, we don't have an exact.
Yeah, I don't know the precise number. It'd been a while.
Yeah. I mean, it was, you know, he'd imprisoned him, but yet he didn't kill him.
Right.
And he would.
He was
would
afraid
visit
of him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he would visit him.
He saw he was a holy man and didn't want to risk.
Probably didn't know really what to do with him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Had to get him out of the
Public.
public
Yeah.
and
Yeah, there's nothing.
I don't think he had compassion. I think he just feared him, but I don't know.
He
So I
was-
don't think he had compassion.
He was
truthfully.
fascinated by him, but I don't know that it was.
I think that might be the better word.
Yeah.
Curiosity. Yeah.
Yeah, because what
It's
am I?
so
What am I
unusual.
going to do now?
Yeah.
such an unusual person.
Yeah. Okay, well, somehow the crowds hear about the location of Jesus and interrupt his grief by finding him. By the time he comes on shore, a great crowd has gathered. Note the reaction of Jesus to the crowd. So, how does Jesus respond to the crowd?
The way he does with almost everything, he puts his thoughts aside and sees to their needs.
Yeah. Compassion for them.
He wants them to go home, and the disciples want them to go home.
Yeah.
But Jesus says, no, let him stay.
I can't remember the Greek word anymore, but the compassion is actually like his
Yeah.
felt it in his guts.
Yeah.
You know, it's like spilling his guts for him. It's a very visceral kind of.
It's more than empathy, it's a full desire to do something.
It's like all of him responded to it completely. And how is Jesus able to move from his own grief over the death of John and reach out in compassion?
That's the kind of person
who he
he
is.
was. That's who he was.
That's how he responds.
Yeah.
It's a pretty powerful way to respond to your own grief and loss, too.
But it
Take
does
care of
happen.
others. Oh,
It does
yeah.
happen
Oh,
when
yeah.
you're in grief. I know there's other things that need to be seen to. And
You can't collapse on yourself. You have too much to do.
I think that's one of the interesting things is some cultures, that is how they respond, is by providing a meal for everyone. So,
Well, I'm sure you've seen all sorts of reactions to grief.
well, even for your own self, your dad passes
Yeah.
away, but there's still
Oh, yeah.
need and that
yeah.
you know it's.
And sometimes it's a cultural thing. It's,
Yeah.
Oh,
it's
most definitely.
what's expected. It's how things
Yeah.
are done in your family.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a big part of it. It's what we've come to
Yeah.
learn,
Yeah.
from past.
Yeah.
Well, I know when my dad's parents died, he was the oldest son, and he had to be there for everybody else and take care of everything, and couldn't give himself the luxury of just grieving. And I saw echoes of that in you as well. There's things we need to take care of. We don't have time to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also how you were raised,
Yeah.
what you saw.
That's what you do. Jesus spends the day healing the sick and responding to the needs of the people. By evening, people are getting hungry. The disciples realize the dilemma and want to send the people away to buy their own food, but Jesus has a different solution. He wants the crowds to stay and the disciples to feed them. That idea must have sounded like a crazy suggestion to his followers. The inventory of food included 5 loaves and 2 fish. That will not go far in a crowd of 5,000 men, plus women and children. At this point, what might be going through the minds of the disciples?
Are you crazy?
How are we going to do this? How are we gonna do this?
You're kidding, right? Oh.
I remember as a kid always wondering, what kind of bread was it? You know, what kind of bread did they have?
Then I remember the manna that came from the clouds when the Israelites
That's right.
were in
Fell on the
the
ground.
Exodus, and God provides, and
Yeah.
it's a definite miracle.
Did they cook the fish? As a kid, did they cook?
It's
the fish?
sushi, girl.
Yeah, things like that. That'd be the kind of stuff that I would think about.
I've never looked that up. I always assumed they were like a smoked fish or something.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
Because I can't,
Probably.
you know, they're doing a day's
Probably.
journey. I
Yeah,
can't imagine.
travel rations, you know.
Yeah, it'd have to maybe be salted
Yeah, or
or
some way prepared.
like our terrible lutefisk.
Yeah.
Which they're gonna have at the state fair. You can buy a lutefisk
On a
like
stick?
taco. No, it's not taco.
I was like, not deep fried on a stick,
Well, it's
please.
like-
Lord.
Freddie was talking about
Yeah.
the new
bread.
food.
Yeah.
Oh,
Freddie
just
was talking.
weird.
Freddie was talking about. Oh, maybe in Lefse I would eat it because I've ate that before.
Theirs is like a pita bread, a thick bread, and then they had stuff in there with lutefisk and
See,
Why
with
don't they
some
use?
syrup,
Well,
and
probably
chocolate,
because Lefse is too.
maybe be able to hide the taste of it.
dude.
But it's not a matter of taste, it's a matter of texture.
They said this would.
I
be
think
slimy.
it's the texture
This'll
that gets
be-
people.
This will be crispy. It won't be slimy. That was mint.
Oh, okay. That's
Oh,
different, too.
okay.
That's
I
a big-
didn't-
that's a big
see,
important
that's
part right
the
there.
part I miss about not getting the Minnesota channels on my TV.
Yeah, because there was a whole program on the new state fair foods.
Okay.
Oh,
and
yeah.
what they're doing with pickles.
Freddie was talking about
Yeah.
that.
Oh,
Oh,
they're getting
pickles
Lots
too.
of
With
pickle
pickles?
stuff.
Oh, I like that.
So the lefse and the pickle
I had
stuff
a-
are just weird stuff.
Yeah, we'll have to.
They always have to
see.
come up with something crazy and wild.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's try to get there again.
People were making comments that the lutefisk really got people going.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
I am sure.
Ooh, yeah,
That's scary stuff.
yeah.
We'll see.
How would you describe the compassion of Jesus?
Always present.
Well, and exorbitant, you know, and just and exuberant and
Yeah.
beyond all bounds. And
Always there. Always on.
Same answer as question 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just, you know, one of the things we talked about yesterday at Text Study is, you know, he said, feed them, and he didn't say, you know, feed those and not those. He didn't differentiate between groups or any. He just fed them and had compassion for them. Okay. Well, taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciple gave them to the crowds. Jesus blessed the bread and broke it and gave it away. Those actions say a lot about the ways of Jesus. On that day, the crowd of thousands is satisfied. There are even leftovers. The feeding of the thousands with bread and fish is a story of grace upon grace, when compassion triumphs. This meal of grace is sparked and motivated by the love and compassion of Jesus. What a stark contrast to Herod's birthday feast, where pleasure and jealousy rules, resulting in the death of an innocent man. Yet both stories reside next to each other in Matthew 14, 1 through 21. We can learn much from Jesus and his response to his cousin's death. Despite it all, Jesus remains centered in love and compassion. So the first question is, what surprises you most from this story?
Probably the miracle of how abundant we can make the fish and the bread. How this can be such a miracle in itself too.
Well, and too, the fact that that was thought of. I mean, when you're going through that, and then you have all these strangers, and you're thinking about their well-being, that takes some.
But it's a basic need to feed someone.
Well, I just think of the faith of the disciples as well. I mean, what Jesus is asking is absolutely crazy. But he says, "Okay, this is what we're going to do," and then
They've
and they do it.
They've seen it before. I
Yeah,
mean,
you know, they're like, "Okay, I don't understand it. I don't know how this works."
Sometimes you don't have to understand
You know, the
something.
water into wine at the wedding. I wonder if this is where that breaking of bread comes in, because the statement, break bread with me. You know, that phrase.
I think that's one of the other things we get is that happens a lot throughout the Gospels. Is Jesus, especially in Luke's
Even
Gospel,
before the
Jesus-
Last Supper.
Yeah, Jesus is constantly breaking bread.
Yeah.
Because that's sharing a meal with someone, a fellowship.
Yeah. Yeah, it's more than just let's grab a quick bite to eat, but it's really saying something to people around you, who you're eating with and who you're sharing with. It's a very intimate sort of thing. It was a much more loaded sort of thing than we would necessarily see it as. It's a lot more
Mix of
culturally
people, too.
implied.
Real mix of people.
Yes.
Who's to say,
And it's a witness because people are going to see who you're eating with, as we see later and earlier in the Gospels where people complain.
Well, and that, you know, out of those 5,000 men plus women and children, I mean, there's no discerning who gets what. It's just handed out freely, you know, no matter who you are, whether you're more of a Pharisee kind of person or you're one
If
of
you're a
the
true
worst-
believer.
Yeah, you know, it's just
Or if you're
liberally
just there for
handed out.
curiosity's sake.
Yeah, yeah. You just liberally hand it out to everybody.
I think, yeah. And one of the other things in looking at this is the idea of living in a life of scarcity or abundance.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how do we approach life, with what we have?
Yeah. 'Cause, yeah, when we look at it through an attitude of scarcity, then we're going to guard what we have, and heaven forbid that anybody else should get the little bit that I have. You know, with an abundance, you're like, here you go. Very different sorts of ways of functioning in the world.
That's the truth.
So, and what in Jesus allows him to reach out to others with compassion?
That's who he is.
Mm-hmm.
That's who he is. It's always his makeup. And you meet people like that.
Oh, yeah.
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 Who are always thinking of others.
Yeah. So how might Jesus reach out to you in compassion?
Well, he does every day, I know that.
Yeah.
Um,
Little miracles every day.
Absolutely.
Getting up in the morning.
mhm.
You get to a certain age and you think about that.
That haziness wasn't a beautiful sunrise like the day before, but yeah.
There's humidity and that's good for the corn.
Yeah.
Well, I know, but it's hard on my breathing, let me tell
sure
you.
it is.
Yeah.
I'm sure you too, Pastor.
Oh, it's good for the corn.
Yes.
I've heard that.
Joe, I think, said that the ragweed was pretty bad too, according
Oh,
to
is that right?
some.
Yep.
That's another.
It's good for you.
Does he have
That-
allergies?
No, but he's worried about, well, yeah, kind of. I mean, you know, it's environmental. I mean,
Sure it
you
is.
can only take so much of it.
Yeah.
And you're hacking and,
Well, I think I've never had allergies, but I've reacted so much this year to
well,
just
my eyes are
Well,
the
the
worst.
smoke was tough on everybody.
My eyes have been the worst.
yeah.
Have they?
Yeah, Sadie's
Burning
been
and
complaining
stuff.
about that.
Yeah, our eyes have been bugging her.
I got eye drops all the time. Becky used them this morning, but
I don't know if she'd allow us to do eye drops. She'd probably freak out.
well, she'd learn.
There'd be a lot of relief
Yeah,
Yeah.
there would be.
if you could talk her into it.
Okay.
It does help the red, the itchy.
I'm gonna run away.
You have to head out? Okay. All right.
You take care.
It's kind of a crazy day today.
Word among us now.
Yep. After Hurricane Katrina and the breach of the levees in New Orleans, people were left stranded on the top of houses and businesses. Search and rescue teams were sent, but the destruction was massive, with limited resources and communication. The human cries for help were deafening, even though there were no microphones on those stranded rooftops. Scenes of the devastation have been etched in the memories of any who watched television during the recovery efforts. People throughout the country and world responded with heartfelt compassion, reaching out to those in need. At the time of Hurricane Katrina, the experts predicted a 25-year recovery period. Years later, the story of response continues as people of compassion continue to travel to the New Orleans area to provide hope, skills, and love. How long does it take to recover from
I
trauma?
don't think you ever completely recover from a trauma.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
It's history that you deal with.
It's forever part of your story, part of who you are.
And I remember visiting with this gentleman that had left New Orleans to go to Houston and had the same problem
Yeah.
with the hurricane in Houston. And he was moving to Minnesota. I said, well, now you're going to have to deal with snowstorms. He was moving to Wilmer, which I don't know why, but I didn't really ask.
You know, they have a huge museum down there in New Orleans dedicated to Katrina. And it's the most frightening thing to go through because they start you at the very beginning and then it's the constant
Where is that at?
videos. It's in Jackson Square.
Oh,
It's
okay.
in one of those buildings
Oh, did
in
you just
Jackson
see that
Square.
just
Well,
recently?
Sherry and I were down
when
there.
they were down there.
I think it was 2010, 2011, and they had this big museum, and
We did
just every bit of the trauma that city went through is
Sure.
displayed, and
Yeah,
so it
sure.
and it's chronological. So as you move through it, you feel that it's what it's coming at you.
So
Yeah.
that's Jackson Square.
Yeah,
I
yep.
didn't, I've
One of those
been there,
buildings.
but not,
Yep.
I have to look that up.
Yeah.
And then, and of course, you've been down there since Katrina okay.
Yeah.
So the buildings with the blue tarps on, they're still all over.
I know,
the place.
I know. And they were telling us that they can't touch some of this because they can't find the landowners for one. And
And
it
there's-
takes a lot of jurisdiction to deal with that. And that's the reason too, the money, they couldn't deal with it. They don't know if these people even want to do anything.
Yeah.
So you have beautiful places. When we were around doing a survey, you have beautiful places that were fixed up, and then you've got this eyesore,
Yeah.
and you can't touch it because of legal.
Yeah.
They can't just.
But
go in
I'm
and
sure
tear
they
it
can
down.
by now, because I think
I
after
would,
so long,
yeah, you
you
can,
can
there was
declare
back
something.
taxes,
yeah,
whatever.
yeah, and they can condemn.
But then there's still the money issue.
Oh, absolutely.
As far as
But the trauma, I mean, what
You
those
don't-
people went through, that never goes away.
Well, I just think of the multiple neighborhoods
Yes.
that are just gone. They no longer
Right.
exist.
Yeah, and that was the thing too. How do they bring their kids back to this area? Well,
Mm-hmm.
the people with families, they moved to Brookings. They moved to, they were relocated, never to come back,
Right.
Because they didn't.
There's nothing
they,
to come
they
back
didn't
to.
have no. And the couple people that we talked to, that they did have a strong family that still lived in that area, and that was the reason why they rebuilt. So, yeah, I'm thankful to have been down there, but
It's really something to see.
Yeah. Well, and that the worst hit were the ones that could least
Yeah.
heavily.
take that.
Well,
yeah.
that's how it goes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's like tornadoes in trailer parks.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a given. It's a given. If it's going to go through, it's going to hit them, and yeah, there's been so much of that.
Well, how might acts of compassion differ at the time of a disaster as opposed to years later?
Well, initially, it's
Immediate needs.
exactly, and later it's rebuilding.
Yeah.
If you can
can.
rebuild.
Well, and addressing trauma from the fresh. Okay, we just need to
Oh, yeah.
get you some water and a blanket.
And
To
mental health.
all those years later, still trying to rebuild your life.
And some never
Very good
could.
Yeah. But I just think of the generations and the legacies and the stories that were lost because of it. I mean, there's such a human toll.
That's true too.
It was a terrible thing. I remember watching on the news. They knew it was coming. They knew how bad it was
But
going
that
to
levee
be.
just-
Yeah. And then to try to rebuild those systems and to put in the systems of piping. And then when they had another storm, the piping failed. So they didn't, their initial attempts to keep this from happening again failed. And then
Yeah.
yeah. So they've really been through it.
They really have. And just to know that they continue to live under that danger.
Yep.
It hasn't gone anywhere.
Exactly.
Well, it's kind of reminds me too of Florida when they had all of it when we were up to our cousins for an anniversary party, and one of the
Oh,
groomsmen's
yeah. I'd come
family
out of
was
Florida.
down there, and she'd lived out more hurricanes, and she was not going to go.
Yeah.
And she was supposed to be right in the eye of it. John Dean and
Yeah.
Cola's mother-in-law.
Yeah.
She was not going to move, and so they got down there before the worst of it hit, and she still was not going to move. I don't remember how old his mother was, but it didn't hit as full force where they were.
That's
But
good.
But you look at what the weather, the climate change is doing to our
Oh my
weather,
gosh,
and this
yes.
is a constant.
Yes.
It's a constant. It's going to have to be something that's
Yeah. Well, and
learn
that's
to live with or readjust our living.
Well, and that's, they try to do some forecasting about, as sea levels rise and all those kinds of things. And it's just horrific. I mean, even the most, conservative, careful of estimates, you look at it and you're like, oh my word.
Look at both the east and west coast.
Yeah.
We can't control a hurricane, I don't care what you say.
You can't control
You
the
can't
wind.
control a tornado, you have to
A
be
heat
flexible.
wave. A
Yep.
heat wave. That's
We can't control a
deadly.
heat wave, yeah.
Yeah, it's just, I think about Arizona where folks used to go and just how truly deadly it is to live there. You know, you have, if you're not at least somewhat well off, it's just not in any way safe. It's just scary. I don't know. Well, compassion is defined in Webster's dictionary as sympathetic consciousness of others' distress, together with a desire to alleviate it. It is one thing to sympathize with someone. It is something else to feel a desire to alleviate the suffering or distress. The word compassion is composed of the prefix com, meaning with, and pati, which means to bear or to suffer, as in the word patience. The Greek word reflects a deep, wrenching movement from the depth of the bowels. That's what we're talking about, the very guts coming up.
Oh, okay.
In other words, Jesus responds to the suffering of people from the depth of his being. Describe a time when you felt compassion extended to you.
Definitely when my husband died. My parents died. Whenever you lose someone,
Yeah.
or sickness.
I think when you have a change in your health, when you can't take care of yourself,
Yeah.
somebody steps in and
If you're lucky,
yeah,
you're
Yeah.
lucky.
yeah.
Yeah, I can't help thinking about folks I've known who really don't have anybody,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And what do you do when things get desperate? And how very fortunate we are to have who we do have.
Well, I know a year ago today I lost a very good friend, and his wife probably was as much as anything to extend compassion to the ones, just because of her nature.
Yeah.
And
She knew how bad everyone was feeling.
But I think it's just such a sense of grace being offered. Just freely offered.
There's all sorts of different ways to have it come your way too.
Yes.
There's just all sorts of different ways. So there isn't a standard. There isn't a. It's just, you know, you're always surprised at what people will do. And
Yeah. One, too, you know, when a disaster first happens or somebody first dies, there's usually a nice response. But I'm really appreciative of those who go the
consider
distance,
it
you know, past the
it's
initial.
usually family that,
yeah.
in my estimation, that have been the first to respond and last the longest.
Yeah.
You know, because friends will say something, oh well, you know, but they don't follow through necessarily.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, it's not their fault. They don't. It's just life gets busy and off they go. You know, and people can say things too. You know, they can say, you know, how long they'll hang in there with you. and
Empty
then
words
Yeah,
sometimes.
and
so
it
bad.
happens. It happens.
Yeah. Well, and I think it does represent just how our family are just more close to us. They just have a deeper connection to us.
And the people who are like family,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
like my friend.
For sure. What does it feel like to have someone alleviate your suffering?
It's a wonderful thing.
Such a sense of relief.
And it depends on if you're
Warm
ready
and
to-
fuzzies.
There you go.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it's a good thing.
And what does it feel like to have someone ignore your sufferings?
You know, I
Somebody
honestly-
stabbed you in the back.
I don't know if I can remember when I've had that happen. I don't know, but sometimes I don't think I'm very sensitive to that sort of thing. But, you know, just out and out.
Well, there are people, and you know that just see they're so self-centered that they don't see their actions are causing you great suffering.
Yeah.
you know.
They don't,
It's-
they don't see it.
They don't. They're so about themselves, and they don't have a clue to what they actually are doing is hurting you greatly.
Well, and, you know, and not only the pain of someone not caring, but just that how little you are valued, how little
Yeah.
you matter to them.
Yeah,
I mean, that's kind of like, you know, being hurt again
yeah.
and again.
Yep.
So we all want to be cared for and appreciated, and
Indeed,
Yeah.
indeed.
some people seem to be natural and gifted at detecting the needs of others. With or without training, they seem to know how to respond and act on that knowledge. They ooze compassion. In other cases, the pain of seeing someone in pain is too difficult to bear and immobilizes the viewer. Yet in the same situation, other people remain unmoved and cannot detect pain in another human, even if it is obvious. Why do some people reach out with acts of compassion while others don't?
That's a hugely difficult question.
Mm-hmm.
I think just some people have different capacities.
Yeah.
You know, I guess I've known folks who are just pretty clueless to the world around them, and others who, I'm like, do you ever think of yourself? You're, you know,
Very tuned in.
yeah.
It's amazing the kinds of things that you remember that affect you when you're going through something. But
Like flashbacks to
Yeah.
a time that you didn't remember for 50
all of
odd
a sudden it
years.
hits you.
Yeah.
That was when Marv was so very ill in the nursing home, a family member came into the room, and I was expecting them, but I wasn't expecting them to come through the door and just break, just fall apart,
Oh.
just sob. And I remember watching and being so touched by that, because that was very much a show of compassion, though they didn't think it was, but they went to pieces, and that was an act of compassion. They
How
didn't
much-
care that there were other people in the
Yeah.
room. They didn't care if other people saw it, which you know how we are about wanting to guard our.
Yes,
I
yes.
do not want to appear emotional in public, that sort of thing, but so it's amazing, that kind of thing. Lots of that kind of stuff.
Well, and just revealing how deeply
Yes.
they felt it.
Or sitting with you, just sitting with you, just not talking, just sitting.
Just being with.
Yeah, yeah. So times like that. Yeah.
What makes a person no longer able to see suffering and feel compassion?
They've been so hurt.
Yeah.
They've been so hurt. They're scarred. They can't. They're beaten up. We know people that have been beaten up by life. They got nothing left. I mean, the tank is empty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some people, I think, are just wired differently.
Oh, yeah.
You know. And you know, I just think help think about nature versus nurture. I mean, some of it is just how we are, and others is just what we've had shown to us, what has been modeled to us, and how we deal with what has come our way. I mean, I've had people say that, you know, people say, you know, I can rely on them, but they never. It's just words. They never come through, and eventually they developed a sense of not being able to trust anybody.
Yeah.
You know, and then therefore not putting themselves out, because it's just going to hurt. It's just going to be rejection. That's all that's ever going to happen.
So your experiences in life will color that.
Certainly. You know, and it takes.
And that, like for Marv, the type of person he was to our family for all the years he lived, all of the years. It's hard to know that
Yeah.
we have another broken chain.
That is hard.
Yep. Well, and I think too, sometimes there are just times where we've just had too much. It's just
Yeah.
been too much,
Yeah.
and I need to shut down now. And
I bet you get to that point.
yeah,
Yeah. You and Pastor Chuck are constantly being asked to
But you know,
join in the grief.
But you know, sometimes that helps too, when you try to reach out to something. I know, Fred and I went to see Shar Satter right after Luke passed away, and they were gone. So we just, left a note, and who would know that before he was buried, Fred would be gone too, just in that short a time. But you still reached out to them, and they reached out to us, and we shared a loss at the same
Absolutely.
time. But we helped each other too. We worked through that. It's kind of what you do
yeah,
for each other.
Sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And I think there's just times where it's just more raw. It just
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
We I'm gonna get choked up. We did Curlin's funeral, and then we had to teach confirmation that Wednesday. And for part of the class, we were in the sanctuary, and the banner with Curlin's name was still up. That was hard, but it was also kind of a joyful thing because we were talking about baptism, and just a reminder that it's not physically here, but we're still connected, and
Yeah. Yes.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And I love one of the sayings that you'll see here or there, about how we treat other people. You don't know what battles
Right.
they're
Yes.
going through.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of compassion as well, is recognizing, I'm got my own battles, I got my own stuff that's going on, but I don't know what's going on in you, and I recognize that and I respect that. So yeah. Despite hearing the details of the horrific death of John the Baptist, Jesus still was able to have compassion for those in need. The times in which Jesus lived were not easy. Plus, people had basic needs. They became hungry or sick. Jesus not only saw their distress, but acted to alleviate it. How might you more actively respond to those in need?
Well, seeing to what basic need you can help, and maybe in doing that, you can minister for them.
Yeah. I think there's a reason why one of the first responses, at least in rural communities, is that you give people more food than they know what to do with.
Yeah.
You're making sure that their needs are being met,
Well, if you don't know anything else to do.
One, I think too,
It
oftentimes,
opens a door though.
yeah,
How many times that I brought rice, and then they want to talk, and that's great.
Yes.
And I mean, I don't always have the time if I'm in a rush, but they know that's there, and they know that.
and I think that gift opens the door to say, hey, here's food to eat, and you know what? If you need anything else, or if you need to talk,
Right.
I think it just says so much. And I think, and oftentimes we don't have the words, we don't know the right things to say. And so, farmers
opens
got,
a door.
it does. And it also, it's a way of saying, I love you, I care about what's going on. I would say the right words if I knew them. I just think about like farmers who get really sick, and then everybody shows up and harvests their crop for them. It's just a giant way of
Seeing what
saying,
needs and just doing.
yeah, we care deeply and we want to make sure you're taken care of.
Oh, you remember those situations, and they took food. They worked all day, and they got it all done. So many people.
And their own crop didn't get taken out
Yeah.
because they worked all together and they stopped what they were doing for themselves.
And went and helped.
Yep, for sure. How might you act to alleviate the suffering of someone this week?
Just be there for them. Whatever is needed. Whatever
We
you
don't
can
know
do.
yet.
Yeah. Well, Chuck meets with a family today after a loved one has died, and
Oh, man.
Just constant.
it is constant. It really
You
is.
guys have been,
And
yeah. You need to get away.
just think about, I mean, that's one of the true gifts of getting to do what we do, is that we can be present and we can be something positive in some of the worst times of people's
Support
lives.
them.
And
You
also
know.
necessary. So necessary.
And then we get to
Well, it's your calling.
Yeah. It is, and I think we just get to have, pretty concrete, recognized ways of being there for people. But for the average person, it's like, okay, you have to figure out how am I going to do this in a way that works for them and for me, and
That's accepted.
that yeah.
And you can't teach compassion. I don't think you can teach it.
You can model it for
I
people.
think that's
You
the
can
better
model it.
way.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what you've learned from examples. Yeah. Well, I feel that I was called to be here as in my role as a nurse, and to give this community and this area the best healthcare.
Absolutely.
That and I think that's kind of another thing. We're put here to work alongside our family and see to what we can do.
Absolutely.
And that's what you and Chuck have been able to do for our community, and it's very appreciated.
Yeah.
Well, and when we talked to our kids about their futures, I said, you guys will figure things out, and we'll support
never
you
know.
every stitch of the way, and we have no idea what it's going to be. And they say,
Yep.
I just hope that whatever you end up doing, it's going to have a positive impact on other people's lives.
Yep.
But don't forget to call on him for
Yes.
leadership.
Yeah.
You got that Holy Spirit guiding you. It doesn't necessarily, but looking back after almost 70 years, I know, and I know
Yeah.
darn good and well that was the push sometimes. Sometimes it had to be some other circumstance that pushed me into that I wasn't comfortable with, but in the end it was the best.
Sometimes it's a nudge, and sometimes it's a swift kick in the pants.
Yeah.
Or a tragedy.
Yes.
Or
Or a tragedy.
Yes.
yep.
I probably wouldn't have worked, as hard as a surgical nurse had Fred not lost his leg. And it was put upon me that, we need you in our, full time, not just whenever you can in Slayton. We want you all the time.
Yep.
And that push to all the time in Slayton was where I was meant to be.
Was a good thing.
It was where I was meant to be.
Yep.
Yeah. I
Well,
think
I just think there's some professions that almost every profession that truly is a calling, and it's a ministry, and it's a gift. I see that.
I was happy with Westbrook and working surgery, sometimes in Tracy, sometimes in Slayton, sometimes in Westbrook, sometimes where I was happy with that being kind of split all over the place. But to have one focus was crazy for me.
Yeah.
But I'm so glad I did.
I'm really grateful. My father was a school teacher, and there's so many times where he just wanted to throw up his hands. Because he's like beating my head against a brick wall. Why do I even try? But what is really cool is I've talked to classmates and other former students, and they all remember Mr. Holmgren. And it's always a positive remembrance. And I'm always like, Dad, you got so frustrated and you felt like, why do I even bother? But you have been an important person in generations of the people, and that's a beautiful thing. And I think of all my teachers who made an impact, and yeah, I think of the doctors and nurses who've showed compassion. They didn't have to show compassion; they were just doing their job, but they did. They rose to that, and just the different people in different positions in our lives, who are doing what they're supposed to be doing, but then they
Go above and
go
beyond.
above and beyond. Beautiful thing. Well, I hope that we don't have to encounter too much suffering for people this week, but when we do, because we will, that we can be aware and try to offer some bit of love or hope as we do so. But why don't we pray? Jesus, we have so much to learn from you. Remove the clutter from our hearts and fill us with compassion. Help us to reach out to feed the hungry, heal the sick, care for those in need, and share your love. Amen. Take time to look around you. Who might God be calling you to reach with an act of compassion?
We'll find out.
Now, I can't help thinking about that. Every time I'm out and about and whether shopping or whatever we're doing, and looking at the people around me and just thinking,
What's going on?
what's going on in your life and what is it that you need right now? We were doing a little shopping yesterday after we picked up our car, supposedly fixed. and there was a kid that just was totally losing it, just screeching and screaming, and it just went on and on.
Another
and
one
on
like
and
the one
on.
in the McDonald's.
Oh God! Well, it started.
You're getting a lot of them.
And and it's just so frustrating and annoying, and it's just like a siren, and it won't stop.
Yeah.
And they actually came walking by, so it was a mom and a dad, and two boys, and the younger boy was just, he just had lost everything, and and the look on the mom's face of just, okay, you just gotta survive this, And I looked at her and I said, oh, we've all been there. It's pretty tough, isn't it? And she wasn't really in a place to have a conversation at that point, which was, no problem. But, you just kind of hope whatever you do, how you react, that it's going to be helpful.
Right.
Because it would have been really easy just to be like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with them? Just give that kid a quick swat in the bottom or something, But I try to remember that because I had a headache and I'm like, oh, somebody should get up, But having to remind myself, no, have some compassion for what this poor parent is going through. Oh, God. And I remember being very thankful that all of a sudden having a moody, difficult teenager was put into perspective as well. Oh, God. No, she's good. She's really good.
Yes, she is.
And she, and she's confused too by, when you go through puberty, it's such a hit of so much, and you aren't you're even in control of your emotions. They're just everywhere, and she's just bewildered by it a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's okay, sweetie. This is normal.
We'll all level out.
It will. Though I don't know. There's times in our own lives. I don't care what age you are. Where you're like, whoa. But thanks, guys. Have a good rest of the day. And thanks for joining us, folks.